Good morning to you.
Good morning, Julia. Thanks for having me on.
Well, thank you very much for joining us once again. We're all recovering ourselves, think, from Conservative Party conference. But do you think it's quite, extraordinary? I would say utterly bizarre that the business secretary and the chancellor have not had any conversations. It would appear, according to the Treasury, about whether or not there should be a bailout for companies that are struggling because of high energy bills, especially when they are the most energy dependent industries.
Well, it is very surprising that they haven't spoken to one another about this, but it's also surprising that it's even on the table because, of course, Kwasi Kwarteng and Rishi Sunak are great free market conservatives, or they once were, and I admire them both. But really, they should be looking at how we take the burdens off business by getting the state out of the way. If I can just read you a short quote from a report. If I can find it, I'm sorry, I've just lost it. But
No,
the
that
point is
always
that
happens.
the
Don't worry.
cost of energy report, which came out in 2017, pointed out that there were so many interventions now in the energy market that people couldn't list them all, and that the interactions between them were not well understood. And this is the situation we face. So free market conservatives like Kwasi and Rishi, excuse me, should be talking to each other about how we get the government out of the way, how we go for gas, and how we solve this problem by
Well,
lifting off the cost.
Well, this is one of the issues, and I know you've got strong issues about the costs of this net zero target by 2050, which is going to be, it just seems to me to be the only focus of the government when we're heading into COP26 summit in Glasgow in November. But for me, there are four different issues we should be looking at with energy. One, it should be cheap and affordable. Two, it should be reliable. We know we're going to have it, and wind blowing and wind not blowing ain't that reliable. And three, it should be secure. And then four, yes, it should be as clean as possible. But the reality is we've only focused on clean since that Theresa May pushed forward that net zero policy, and everyone's forgot about the first three. And that's why we're in the predicament we're in right now.
Well, Julia, yes, it looks at the moment like for years policymakers have been winging it and just assuming that we would use the interconnectors to get the power that we needed, perhaps from French nuclear. But really, it obviously wasn't a good idea. We should now be looking at a situation where to deal with the problem of intermittency, that is, that the sun doesn't always shine, the wind doesn't always blow, we should be going for gas, and we should make sure that we've just got this ability to fill in the gaps between the base load from nuclear, which we should be building up, and the renewable energy that the government's been going for. And that, I'm afraid, it just does mean gas. And we can't keep hoping for something to turn up.
Oh, that's it. Again, there's the decision to stop fracking for shale gas, when we've seen that has produced not just very cheap energy in America, but also very secure and reliable energy. We obviously don't get much of our gas at all from Russia, but the rest of Europe does. Germany totally dependent on it. And as we see, when Vladimir Putin decides to play a few games of his Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline to get that approved by the EU, he can just shut off the gas, push up prices, and then, hey, let's start negotiations. The whole of Europe is basically at the mercy of Vladimir Putin when it comes to gas prices, because he and, of course, the extra demand in China, that has pushed up gas prices for everybody. But we are at the mercy of the international markets and international supply and foreign tyrants unless we make sure we have our energy supply secure here.
Well, so it seems, Julia, but if I may say so, the situation's even worse than you've just set out, because the government, or rather the regulator, has just refused permission to Shell to continue development of the so-called Jackdaw field, which could supply 10% of our needs. And, these kinds of decisions are pathological. They're self-harming. We really should be going for the gas that we have, the gas that's under our feet with shale, developing the gas fields that we have, and making sure that we're not so dependent on Vladimir Putin right across all of Europe. It's not where we should be. I see now that the ambassador from Russia has said that it's a time that we should be making Russia our partner. But, I'd love to get to a position where Russia could be our partner and we could go forward as great friends. But we're not there yet. There's a lot's got to change between now and then. We can't just slip into partnership just because we're short of gas.
Absolutely.
This really, ministers, I'm afraid, are failing unless they go for gas.
And there's also been, there've been calls for the government to slash the subsidies that we've got on household energy bills, which help push them up by, I think it's at least £150 a year, which basically are subsidising green energy. I think the total tune of 10 billion a year. But this comes as the government is preparing in a couple of weeks' time to add another levy on our fuel bills, this time on our gas bills specifically, just as the price is spiking, to help that subsidy for green energy. So we've got this, this perfect storm of things pushing up our basic household costs. But Why on earth does the government think that putting a green levy onto gas prices at the time when gas prices have gone sky high for tens of millions of households is a good idea?
Well, this is exactly the kind of damaging nonsense which happens when the two front benches agree with one another and the opposition is dysfunctional. I mean, we went into the last election with everybody saying they were going for net zero. The only contest was how far and how fast. But what we see now is we know that the Labour Party will be complaining about fuel poverty, and of course, rightly so. Of course, we should be complaining that people can't afford their energy bills, but they won't be saying, and therefore we should go for gas and do everything to reduce the cost. I mean, so we've got this nonsense position, and that's why the Net Zero Scrutiny Group of Conservative MPs has been launched. I'm very pleased to see Net Zero Watch launching online today. I'm going to be chairing the steering group of this new group of MPs. Craig McKinley will chair the main group. And together, we're going to make sure that there is at least some scrutiny coming from the Conservative benches. I know this is the third time I've now set about an enterprise like this. I'm afraid it's just got to be done. We can't leave it to Labour. They're useless. And if that was down to Labour, we'd just have massive fuel poverty just through this ridiculous consensus. Where the public never get a choice.
But and this is the thing, it's this idea, well, it was in the Tory manifesto. Well, yeah, there are lots of things in the Tory manifesto which they're quite happy to ignore and throw out. A lot of people were voting on crucial issues like, is Brexit going to get done or not? And then again, there wasn't a choice between major political parties who were viable to actually win power in the government over the net zero thing. And as you say, in terms of scrutiny, the fact that we've got a net zero policy that's going to cost trillions and trillions of pounds, which was pushed through after a 90-minute debate in the House of Commons by Theresa May, is frankly laughable. I mean, it's horrific and laughable at the same time. But we've now seen, Facebook. They are now YouTube are instigating censorship of people discussing even the issues around climate change and net zero and the like, because they're going to be refusing to allow monetization. If you put something up on YouTube, you're not going to be able to have a video, have any adverts to go with your video at all to help fund your page. They're going to be withdrawn from any page that has any discussion of whether or not climate change is real or how we deal with climate change. Again, more censorship of what is a really important conversation that needs to be had, and people need to be told, this is what governments want to do and this is how much it's going to cost you.
Well, I absolutely agree that government should be setting out plainly with the public, this is what we want to do and this is what it's going to cost, because they need to generate consent. And if the public aren't clearly bought into what the government is doing, what governments everywhere are doing, we're going to have a terrible political revolt later, one rather like Brexit, where an insurgent will come in, as we saw with the Gilets Jaunes, and say, well, people need another path. And that's why I'm imploring government to go about net zero differently. And I'm not challenging the science. And actually, the idea that we're going to go to net zero is now water under the bridge. That's I was there for that motion. We decided not to divide the House because only a few of us would have voted no. So there was really no point dividing the House. This is now really all about how we do it. And we've got to do it in a way that's politically and economically viable using current technology. We've had several mentions of fusion power from the Prime Minister, from the Energy Secretary. And it's all very well. I'm excited about fusion power, but we can't bet everyone's prosperity on a technology that's really always 25 years away. It's just not sensible. Real people's real jobs, their livelihoods, their future prosperity hinge on us getting energy in plentiful supply right now. And that means going for gas.
Absolutely. Can I also ask you just finally on another topic, as someone who's been part of the COVID recovery group and very much a campaigner against vaccine passports, we talked about this on my show last week. As of today, people in Wales need to have a proof of a double vaccination or a negative test for a lateral flow test if they're over 18 to attend any big events or nightclubs. This would include the Welsh Rugby International against New Zealand on the 30th of October, one of the first to actually require COVID passes. What do you make of this?
Well, it's awful. I mean, it's not a proportionate response to the threat that we face now. The vaccines are working. I think if people want to go to big events now at the current levels of vaccination that we have, it really should be a matter for people to choose their level of risk. If they're daft enough to be unvaccinated as a matter of choice, plus some condition that makes them vulnerable to the disease, and then they go to a nightclub, that really is their choice. And we really should be allowing people to bear their own risk now.
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit rich. I mean, the Conservative Party conference last week didn't have any requirement to show a vaccine passport or a negative lateral flow test. The week before at Labour, there was a requirement for one or the other, but by the second day they'd given up and didn't bother checking it at all. Even though, of course, your negative lateral flow test is hardly valid on the fourth day. I mean, that's not how they work. There's a lot of hypocrisy from the political and media classes over this.
Well, of course there is. There always is. I mean, this is one of the ridiculous things about the way that political life goes on. But I mean, some of us are trying to bring sense to this debate. I think vaccine passports don't work in practice or in principle. I think they should be banned. I don't think we should be messing about trying to coerce people into getting vaccinated. We should be setting out the facts to the public and asking them to choose.
Steve Baker.
But treating the public with respect is how I would go.
Steve Baker, thank you very much indeed. Conservative MP, Deputy Chair of the COVID Recovery Group there.